Now today I'm representing the Lord Mayor, Vincent Kiwi, who sadly can't be with you today, oddly because he's being detained by another event about sustainability. So we'll gather, as I hope during the course of today, that the city is about sustainability. I know we would have liked to have offered, particularly those in Southend-on-Sea, condolences for the tragic loss of Sir David Amos. I also know that Vincent would have congratulated Southend-on-Sea on becoming a fully fledged city of the United Kingdom. So well done. The comedian Jay Leno once joked, according to a new UN report, the global warming outlook is much worse than originally predicted, which is pretty bad when they originally predicted it would destroy the planet. Sadly, that quip was from 2007, and today we really do have a sense of urgency, which is why we're here today. Today we are in Britain's first city, the City of London, a place that is both the historic heart of our financial services and an important part of our future. The city has also been an important part of green. The very first Clean Air Act in the UK was here in 1953, before the 1956 National Clean Air Act, through to, in 2005, running the enormous London Accord, publishing on climate change alongside Nick Stern, and on to today's Green Finance Institute. As I said, right now the Lord Mayor is also focused on supporting green finance and using the UK's financial expertise to fund international sustainable infrastructure that provides multiple benefits, from greater social cohesion to water retention, from green spaces to air quality. Now, sustainable infrastructure is an important issue for everyone, and it's also for my day job, as Pippa said, Zien, the City of London's think tank. Zien had a hand in carbon markets coming to London. We started the stranded assets debate, and we created the policy performance bond market, where this past March, the government of Chile issued a bond, like an inflation-linked bond, where the interest rate goes down if they meet their carbon emission and renewable energy targets for 2030. Now, some of you may also remember me because in 2019, not least thanks to institutional support from Southend-on-Sea and Imperial College, and personal support from Anna Oxenham, Rachel Porter, and Chris Livemore, my business colleague Simon Mills and I wrote the Nature of Smart Cities Business Model Report, an examination of the financing options available to local authorities to fund urban greening programs. That report concluded that equity-based approaches carry political risk, debt-based approaches require the development of effective measurement and monitoring systems, and may lock in policy across multiple electoral cycles. And thirdly, that crowdfunding may be effective at a small scale, but is unlikely to yield sufficient sums for large-scale projects, kickstarting perhaps. And the report emphasized what we're here today to figure out: pricing externalities and income, being clear who benefits, and putting in place solid metrics and data. I'd like to thank the Nature Smart Cities Project for organizing this second capacity building workshop, which we're delighted to host here at Mansion House, and inviting participants from around 30 different local authorities and the UK project partner cities of Cambridge and Southend-on-Sea. I know that today you will be visiting London Wall Place, which is just outside my aldermanic ward of Broad Street. It's a great example of the city's history and modernity. It's also a great example of sustainable infrastructure. It was created using the most up-to-date and sustainable heating and cooling systems, with new gardens that support the city's biodiversity, as well as our livery companies' Pollinating London Together initiative, and also connects businesses that use solar panels and collect rainwater. Implementing this type of work isn't always straightforward, which is why I think it's great that the Nature Smart Cities project focuses on the key barriers to this type of investment, namely political will and finance. If we want sustainable infrastructure, then we need sustainable business plans. Enduring investment and income are as crucial as architectural design or technology. It can help transform an urban area into one where people enjoy congregating, which provides shade, tranquility, and inspiration. And perhaps most importantly, one which enhances biodiversity and access to nature, something which has been shown to be so important during the pandemic. So the question is, how do we move from the paperwork to the projects? And that's the question for us today. I'm optimistic though. Pessimism is for better times. So today, I wish you all the very best in your discussions, and I hope that what is discussed today helps fund sustainable development tomorrow and in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me to do this. I really appreciate it. Like, so I took up the post in Southend at the end of January, so I'm very much the new guy. I don't know how long it is before I can say I can actually blame it on my predecessor when things go wrong, which I'm sure they're doing at Watford now, but that's Rabbit's fault, never mind. Interesting listening to the opening speech here from the Alderman in relation to the City of London and green infrastructure and sustainability and COVID. I often ask the question when I'm doing lectures, etc. Can you imagine if we had no green spaces during COVID? Can you just imagine what we would have done, where we would have gone, and how that would have affected our mental health? It just does not bear thinking about. And that's something that we as local authorities, we as advocates for local authorities, really need to keep pushing around the importance of green open spaces and green infrastructure. I think the other thing which you mentioned is when you're looking at London as a whole, I, for example, parks historian William Pitt in 1808 describing the parks of London, the royal parks, some of the royal parks that were under threat as the lungs of London, Manhattan, back in 1808. Even now we're still talking about the importance of parks and green spaces and still having to persuade politicians how important that they are. And I think the other thing that I kind of reflect on is, I'll come on to Southend in a minute, looking at London, you know, a national park city, with one of the green spaces that you have, you have the Daniel Raven Ellison, who was the urban gorilla. I think it's a great title, maybe I should be the urban dance man. The urban gorilla, looking at how green spaces as the network could work together across the City of London. That's something that we're very much looking at in Southend, very much so these days. And I think, finally, before I get into my notes, who watched the Jubilee concert the other night? Yeah, it was pretty good, wasn't it? Apart from Rod Stewart, it was a bit dodgy, wasn't he? But it was pretty good. But when you listen to Prince Charles and Prince William's speech around sustainability and green infrastructure and open space and nature, how important they showed it. We just need to look at the things that were portrayed onto Buckingham Palace. So again, William Pitt, right up to Prince Charles, we're still talking about it and how important it is, particularly today. As far as this workshop is concerned, I think it's really important. I'm glad to see some people have come together today. And I just want to emphasise that coming together and working in partnership, and again, Southend have been working in partnership with a number of authorities, Cambridge being one of them as part of the Interreg 2 project. And I think the great thing about working together is what we learn and collaboration. I think that's really, really important. We're doing that in Southend. We now have a Launchpad Innovation Centre, which is incredibly successful, looking at climate resilience and the importance of green infrastructure to Southend as a whole, particularly around new developments. And as we all know, going back to William Pitt, the impact of development on our society today and how we incorporate green infrastructure is incredibly important. Also, the way we design and build, reducing carbon emissions, looking at buildings like this, looking at new buildings, looking at how we develop society and the impact of carbon emissions, how we can enhance biodiversity, increase water retention and improve flood management, all incredibly important things that are coming out of this piece of work that we've been doing. And the other thing that's really important is research. I've worked in parks for 33, 34, 34, a long time. And the amount of research that has been done over many, many years into green infrastructure, now particularly into climate change, and the impact of it is vastly, vastly important. That research then has to go up to politicians and leadership, and we need to show leadership that shows how important it is, and we need to continue to persuade our leaders and our political heads, particularly at local authority level, the importance of what it is that we're doing. And finally, I really want to, I'm a new guy, so this is new to me as far as what you're doing here. I just want to congratulate you on the development and the evolution of the business model which you're releasing today. Is that right, Anna? That's coming. You're going to play with it today, and sadly I'm not going to be here to play with it, and I love playing. So the importance of that business model today, so you're going to play around with it today and see the importance and the impact of that. And just applaud the fact that you're all here, and I hope today you get a lot out of it and take away a lot out of it, because there's one thing that we can do is we can make that change, which is really, really important. So well done. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much as well to our two opening speakers. I started work at Southend and City, what was then Borough Council, in September 2019, and I was ecstatic to be given the role of managing the Nature Smart Cities project. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction to the project today, before we really get down to business and look at the Nature Smart Cities business model. So the Nature Smart Cities project is an EU Interreg 2Cs funded project. The overall combined value of the project is 6.38 million, and the project brings together 11 partners across 4 countries. We have 3 academic research-based partners, the University of Antwerp, who are here today, Imperial College London, also represented today, and the University of Ghent. And then we have what we call our 8 city partners. These are local authority partners from cities and towns across our 4 countries. And the idea is that we work together to really bridge that gap between scientific research and practical use to create a tool, to create a business model that really is grounded in the needs of local authorities. We know that there's lots of tools that have already been made, but many of them have lacked that bridge that really contributes to their use in the long term. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to use a video to introduce the project to you. Some of you may have already seen it if you attended our first workshop, but if you haven't, hopefully this is an interesting, quick insight and introduction to the project.
Around 3/4 of Europeans live in cities. Many of these cities are dealing with the effects of climate change, such as heat stress, air pollution, and flooding. The high density of paved surfaces, roads, and buildings further increases these effects. We can do something about this. Trees, rain gardens, green roofs and walls, and other vegetation help to cool cities on hot summer days, capture heavy rainfall, and improve air quality. Research shows that green infrastructure provides a range of other benefits, such as increased biodiversity and improved human health. However, cities often find green infrastructure expensive or difficult to implement. The Nature Smart Cities project aims to support cities to address these challenges. 8 city partners and 3 academic partners in the UK, Belgium, the Netherlands and France have joined forces. Together, we will develop a business model to promote green infrastructure solutions, bridging the gap between research and practice. The model is based on evidence that we collect through interviews with local authorities and analysis of geographical, biophysical and economic data. We also review existing valuation tools and finance options. The model is tested, validated and refined through 7 green infrastructure pilots: Southend-on-Sea, Cambridge, The Hague, Capella, Antwerp, Bruges and Lille. A step-by-step methodology will support cities to use this business model to implement green infrastructure and build climate resilience. For more information, visit our website naturesmartcities.eu.
So why are we here today? What brings us here today? So since 2018, when the project started, our partners have been working together to develop this business model for local authorities. And now we're moving on to the kind of the final stages of the project, which is all about the dissemination and supporting local authorities to utilise the business model to help them make the business case for investment in future green infrastructure projects. To do this, we are running a capacity building programme, which consists of 2 workshops. This is the second, and that programme is being rolled out across all our 4 project countries. So we're having our workshops in the Netherlands and in Belgium taking place in the next couple of weeks in a very similar format to this. And I think that brings me to the end, and I really would like to thank you for joining us in person for this second workshop. It's really nice to get people together physically, and we really hope that we'll benefit from that physical interaction today. I just have one announcement, Pippa, just to say that we are filming this workshop, highlights video, recorded the opening remarks and presentations. If you do not want to be caught in any of those videos, please let me know, and we can make sure that when we edit those, that you don't feature. So only if you have an issue do you need to let me know.
As the other speakers, so no grand titles here. My name is I'm a doctoral researcher at the University of Antwerp, and as a university partner we were responsible for this work package of delivering the business model. And so I will try, I was given 15 minutes, so I will try to tell you all about the benefits of this Smart Cities business model, which is of course far too little. 15 minutes for all these benefits, but I'm sure you'll discover it all in practice this afternoon. So I will try to talk a little bit about when to use the business model, why to use the business model, and then this distinction with the biodiversity net gain, of which I'm sure you all know much more about than I do as a foreigner. But here I am. So I will try to talk as little as possible. So let's start with the video. I also have to manage 2 machines, so that's a little bit confusing.
In European cities, the effects of climate change are increasingly felt. Hotter summers and heavier rain showers lead to heat stress and flooding. In the Nature Smart Cities project, 8 municipalities and 3 universities have teamed up to take action. In 7 pilot projects, they experiment and learn how to build green and climate-resilient cities. Based on their experience, they have developed a business model.
The Nature Smart Cities business model is an Excel tool where local authorities can fill in an infrastructure project. So you fill in how many trees, how many square meters of grassland, and you can see how ecosystem services will be impacted.
So what are these ecosystem services?
Ecosystem services are benefits that nature creates to us, humans. So for example, if we have a tree, it not only improves water retention and infiltration, but also helps filtering the air. We have habitat for biodiversity, small birds for example. So there's a wide range of ecosystem services that are created by just a tree. Together with our colleagues from the University of Ghent, we compiled a list of ecosystem services, primarily from academic research, that are especially relevant in urban settings.
We started out with the idea of making just a PDF document with some information, and we ended up with a tool where the ecosystem services are quantified and people can actually calculate the value of their own projects.
We spent a lot of time developing this business model, but we wanted to be practical as well. So we went out to local authorities to test the business model. And with this feedback, we could refine the business model again to make it even more applicable.
Yellow is a moderate potential. And those results are all summarized in these 4 charts.
The business model tool is becoming really valuable in ways that we never really anticipated. Not only is it allowing us to look at our plans and value them, it's allowing us to go back to our plans. Can we push the barriers? Can we improve biodiversity more? So it's really helping us to be more innovative, to think out of the box.
I think the business model generates a new mindset in thinking wider than just single benefits, but looking at a range of benefits.
I think it's really valuable that local communities can really have numbers.
The business model is a very interesting tool to make a comparison between different scenarios.
For Cambridge, it's been allowing us to express our project in financial terms, which has secured additional funding for the project and its legacy.
With this business model, we hope to give nature and green infrastructure a voice in the decision-making process.
The next step for the business model, I hope people would use the tool to better understand the value of green infrastructure. Maybe once you use it, you will discover new benefits that green infrastructure and ecosystem services in general can generate for you and your city.
So about the business model development, our loyal fans, or the ones that have attended our webinars in the past, might, this slide might seem familiar to them, but we've recycled it once again to emphasize the fact that this business model really is developed in a fully collaborative approach, and so bridging the gap between research and practice. So on the one hand, and that's where we are, we have our academic partners reviewing, evaluating, and bringing together all this knowledge that is already out there, has been generated through previous projects. And then on the other hand, we have our city partners, and through interviews about perceptions, hurdles, barriers, but also expectations and needs in GI development, insights were gained into which links in this process could be optimized to make it easier for local authorities to explore GI options. And then from all of these findings and through the experiences and expertise that we got from valuation applications with our Nature Smart Cities pilots, we co-developed and co-created this business model tool. And then also in the validation phase of demonstrator testing, we tried to involve local authorities as much as possible to make this business model as applicable as possible. And maybe that's also something that I want to say. This is just a starting point for the Nature Smart Cities business model. As the University of Antwerp, we want to keep developing this business model, and so also your feedback today will be is very much appreciated and could mean that in the future the business model is even more applicable and even more relevant to your GI cases. So when to use the business model. So that being said, when would you use this business model tool? We distinguish two different motives for which the Nature Smart Cities business model tool could prove valuable for your municipality. In any case, the business model is best used in early project stages. So the first group of projects are those that have been signed off already, but where the spatial arrangement can still be optimized or is still a little bit subject of debate. And as a municipality, you could then use the Nature Smart Cities business model to evaluate on a higher level. It allows you to evaluate the ecosystem services that are generated or expected to be generated through this project. The second opportunity for business model use then are those that are no projects yet. So currently they may be paved areas, squares, maybe redundant parking areas or impermeable pavements. Any spatial arrangement that you've walked past, maybe this morning when you came here, and made you wonder, wouldn't it be nice if this was a little greener? So we call these project ideas. And then through playing around with the business model, we were able to get a view on how this greening impacts ecosystem services and gives you a little bit of inspiration on how to efficiently use the available space to maximize certain outputs. For example, your municipality might be focusing on mitigating the effects of urban heat islands, and then through the business model you can try different spatial interpretations and see how, explore how this goal might be maximized. Next slide. Why? Why use a business model? So first of all, a business model, as already said a few times, a little bit of repetition does no harm, I guess. The business model is entirely based on academic research and results from a unique collaboration between 3 universities, our university, the University of Antwerp, and then Ghent University and Imperial College London. So you have a scientifically sound yet accessible method at your disposal. Then you get an understanding of the value of ecosystem service, a better understanding of the value of ecosystem services. This might be in a qualitative, quantitative, or monetary way. And then since ecosystem services are defined as benefits nature provides to us, I've already said that in the video, users are allowed to explore and assess the multi-benefits of green infrastructure at the same time. Our business model can not only be used to get an estimation of the expected benefits, but also on the cost side of GI investments, it can give some estimations. So the extensive database allows for updating in the future, so we will try to keep the business model up to date. To get, so this way you get a view on the added value that GI projects are likely to generate and how different spatial arrangements influence this added value. The business model is suited to be deployed on clearly defined project cases. So this means that it works best if you know the size of the area you want to assess, as well as the current state in terms of gray, green, or blue infrastructure. And in this clearly defined project area, you can then deploy the business model to explore how different options to redesign the area impact these infamous ecosystem services. In this sense, the business model is unique in allowing you to compare green and gray options as well. And by going through this process, it will serve as an inspiration, maybe, to fine-tune your plans or ideas with additions to the design of which you haven't or you might have not thought before. And then the final goal of the business model is to have a concise and interpretable overview of the costs and benefits of your GI project and the impacts that different project designs have. And this is then all featured in a fact sheet. So by choosing in the assessment which ecosystem services you want to see assessed, it allows you to speak in relevant arguments, relevant terms to the stakeholder group you wish to communicate with. So it can be with your citizens, it can be with your decision maker. And to support you going through all of this, we've spent a lot of energy into creating 2 documents that you can consult. We have a step-by-step guide telling you what to do in each worksheet, and we have a technical manual that provides the theoretic and academic background behind all of this reasoning. Apart from telling you why use the business model, maybe even more important, I don't know, telling you why not to use the business model, or when not to use the business model. So as previously mentioned, the business model works best with clearly defined project areas. So we discourage the use of the business model for citywide assessment. Other tools are far more qualified to do such an exercise, such as, for example, i3 Eco, which a lot of you might have used already. Since it is a green infrastructure assessment tool, the options to include different types of green infrastructure are limited. So we do not distinguish between different grey building materials for the simple reason that grey infrastructure up until now has not generated ecosystem services. And that brings me to another infrastructure type that is not considered in this business model tool. So there's no option to include photovoltaic systems in the tool to explore renewable energy generation, for example. There's no option to do an assessment about insulation of buildings. We've had these questions before, that's why I'm telling you again. So we only consider ecosystem services, which are only generated by green infrastructure, of course. Then the Smart Cities business tool is built on the premise of urbanized, developed land. So ecosystem service generation is also defined for such areas. We therefore discourage the use of the tool to value vast nature reserves, for example, or vast forests. And as we already emphasized that the business model is most valuable in initial project stages, once again, the business model is like a planning and design tool, so requiring the flexibility that you still have, or being most valuable when there's still some flexibility in the design of your projects. So we believe it's less suited to provide insights in later project stages. For example, when you have to decide which tree species you want to plant, I'm sure you can get advice elsewhere. And this links back to the fact that business model creates a general overview or estimation of a project's impact. So it should not be interpreted as an exact method, so don't come to us if your tree is not generating what we promised. That's not the purpose. So we can therefore not be used as an elaborate study on a certain ecosystem service. So for example, when we provide general estimations on the water infiltration capacity, this can be very different locally due to soil types and other factors. So if you're interested into that, the business model is not as valuable as extensive hydrological modeling per se. And now, the best part of my presentation, a foreigner probably knew about biodiversity net gain. As I've already said, you probably know much more about this than me, so I'll briefly go over what it is and then skip to the similarities and differences. So we've received much feedback from the first workshop about what the relation is between this Nature Smart Cities biodiversity assessment and then the biodiversity net gain. So in the UK, you are required to use this biodiversity net gain, but of course this doesn't rule out the fact that you can also use other approaches that gives you complementary information, such as the Nature Smart City Business Tool. So what the biodiversity net gain exactly does, you know better than me. But as I understand it, it calculates a score for each of 3 broad landscape types, the area baseland, linear features such as hedges, and linear water. But you can't combine these scores, so you can't use one of these types to trade off against another. And within those broad landscape types, the score factors in the type of landscape, the size of the landscape, its condition, which I'm told is an arbitrary assessment, its distinctiveness. So, for example, meadows are high distinctiveness, have high distinctiveness, and then amenity grasslands low. The strategic values such as connectivity to other spaces and then risk factors are also used. Similarities. So to help you guys better understand the differences, let's first go over the similarities between both. So both are based on academic expertise, and both tools use macro-enabled or automated spreadsheets. We both use habitat as a proxy for the biodiversity assessment. We have a before and after methodology. We share the capacity to compare alternative approaches. We cover a variety of landscape types and scales, and neither is a substitute for ecological expertise. Now, the differences. The two approaches do different things, that's clear. So the biodiversity net gain is very detailed in terms of landscape types and classification, which is probably helpful, and it factors in things which the Nature Smart Cities tool ignores. But this also means then, on the other hand, that you have a lot more preparation and groundwork to do, that you even need a qualified assessor for water-based landscapes. And next to this, it also does not allow trading between different landscape types, the area, linear, and linear water thing. And then on the other hand, we have the Nature Smart Cities tool, which calculates the Shannon-Weaver index, a popular metric in ecology, that is, and expresses the diversity of the landscape, and thus also the likeliness to create ecologically valuable environments. And this Shannon-Weaver index is based on the landscape structures and the evenness of these landscape types. It's a metric that can be used to compare a site, looking at different alternatives, but you can also use it beyond that, comparing different sites. Next to this, the Nature Smart Cities business model features species level calculation, albeit for selected species only. And you can make very small changes to a site, such as adding a herbaceous border or a bee hotel, and seeing whether that makes a difference. In that sense, we're talking about the inspiration factor that I mentioned before. Next to this, the Nature Smart Cities business model is less demanding in terms of data, although that also may be a weakness in terms of precision. It makes the calculation more accessible, however, to a non-expert, non-ecologist user, for example. And then the best selling point probably for the Nature Smart Cities business model, it's not just about biodiversity. So biodiversity is an element of the Nature Smart Cities business model, but it's just a small part. It says biodiversity alongside other important metrics such as air quality, water retention, cultural ecosystems, and more. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. I don't know, questions maybe during the breaks? And for biodiversity netting questions, there's still. So that was it. Thank you.
What we'd like to do first of all, this is really about what it's like, the experience, in the flesh, in real life, in your councils, to do this difficult thing, which is to be able to convince decision makers and those who hold the purse strings and others to have green infrastructure, to have green urban projects within our councils, to go above and beyond. So I'd like each of you just to take a few minutes to introduce yourselves and your council and the kind of project that you'd like to share with us today. So if we start, Julia, with you.
Okay, good morning. So my name is Julia Edwards. I'm a Senior Planning Policy Officer at RODA, which is in East Sussex, a largely rural area that touches the coast in Bexhill and in Rye. It's about 200 square metres. It has about a population of about 97,000 people. So you read all this on the train this morning. And, but half of those live in Bexhill. So we have one kind of main urban area, which is Bexhill on Sea. So structurally, with council, we have had a restructure recently, which led to, we are now working with the Directorate of Place and Climate Change, and that was really kind of due to the climate emergency that we declared, like many other local authorities, in 2019. We have, funding-wise, we now have our SIL funding, which is, we have 20% now ring-fenced for climate change projects, so this is the Climate Emergency Fund, and those allocations are made, or that funding is distributed by a climate change steering group, which is made largely up of, well, mainly up of councillors, of our kind of lead members. And for example, the kind of project they might be looking at is putting solar panels on all the village halls across the district. We are at the moment in the throes of a local plan review. My job mainly is neighbourhood planning, but it's all hands on deck for a local plan review, which, as most of you probably know, is quite an intensive, involved piece of work. Our local plan aims to be green to the core. We'll have climate action underpinning pretty much all of the topics throughout the plan, from housing to infrastructure and obviously biodiversity. We are, I think, would you like me to talk about the project now? Yeah, just briefly. Yeah, so we were kind of interested to see how the business model worked for a scheme that I think we're looking at this afternoon, a site which is Coombe Valley Nature Park. In order to, we weren't entirely sure at the beginning how it was going to.
So I think just describe the park, that's all.
Okay. So Coombe Valley Nature Park is a nature park. It sits between Rother District and Hastings St Leonards, which is where I live, and it is largely, it's a park of about, I'm putting it down, 136 hectares, and largely used at the moment by dog walkers, and there's quite a lot of sports. Underutilised, I think you probably would say. It's now, it was started up in, not started up, but groundwork, created a master plan for it with 3 phases several years ago, probably about 10 years ago now, which stalled because of council funding and austerity, so it's just been sitting there in the master plan. We thought this business model would be a good opportunity to look at the different phases that groundwork produced and to be able to see how we could uplift them and really use that. We've got a very green cabinet at Brother, very supportive, but in terms of funding and how to kind of, I suppose, work with the community interest company that now run the park and work with them to see how we can improve that area.
Thank you, that's really, really interesting. So one of the changes, you know, to come on the back of the climate emergency, have they also declared a biodiversity emergency, or has it been linked as part of the climate emergency? No. It's just in trust. Yeah, okay, good. And Alex, Selling Day.
Yeah, hi, so yes, I'm Alex from the South Cambs District Council. My title is actually Green Investment Manager, so quite interesting, and I sit within the Economic Development and Commercial Investments team. I'm mainly focused on developing business cases for a range of kind of green energy projects, and also looking at green infrastructure projects as well. So obviously the business model was really interesting to me. The project that we looked at to kind of utilise and try out the business model was a recent acquisition that we made at Camborne Business Park, which is also where our South Cambs HQ main office building is based as well. So it's a 55-acre kind of a commercial business park. It's got tree-lined avenues, it's got some lovely ponds, it's got a green area to start off with. However, we wanted to look at, because we have more agency over that particular area, we wanted to look at how we could do a green infrastructure project to kind of complement what's already there. There's also a vacant plot that we have that hasn't been built out for commercial use as well. So we wanted to look at how we would build out that particular plot, and also look at what measures we might include from a green infrastructure perspective. So yeah, really enjoyed kind of playing around with the model and seeing how it worked and testing out things.
Thanks very much. And Jo?
Hi everyone, I'm Jo Gay. I'm Head of Climate Change at Southend City Council. I joined the council in late September of last year, so like Paul Rabbits, who spoke earlier, I'm still relatively new to the council, but the remit is the widest, broadest remit for climate change, so it includes mitigation obviously, but also adaptation and resilience. Southend as a borough, as a city, it's got about 180,000 people. It's quite densely populated, and we have about 7 million visitors to the city every year. So there is a real kind of balance, conflict between the carbon mitigation, adaptation, resilience programme, and a great need for growth, including what's coming through with our new local plan that's being developed with Claire, who's here. In terms of structural changes in the organisation, I think my appointment has been quite a change for the organisation. It gives officers, but also other managers, an opportunity to kind of funnel their requests that are climate related through me, and theoretically I have a platform to make a change. It's not always easy, especially with the financial challenges that I think all boroughs are facing at the moment. And in terms of projects, we've got the Launchpad scheme, but I think Anna's probably best placed to talk about that. I think my perspective that will be helpful here is about how to help decision makers understand the benefit and what kind of things, what are the kind of keywords or buzzwords that they would like to hear in order to get that opportunity to bring your project forward.
Thanks so much, Jo. And I'd like to go back to you, Alex. So we've heard from the others that they're doing a change in terms of the structures within the organisation as well. So we've got the head of climate change, that's a new role that's been sort of fitted in. We've also got this new position of fascinating head and place in climate change. Have there been any changes as well in South Cambridgeshire District Council in terms of...
So not so much recently. I would say my post, I think, is probably quite a distinct post. So green investment manager. I don't think there's probably many local authorities that have that post. So I think that was something that was new that came out of the back of the kind of climate emergency declaration that we made. And I think it provides me an opportunity to be close to some of those decision makers around the financial aspects. You mentioned, touched on that. So I think it's quite a well-placed role to kind of tackle some of those challenges around how you interpret and how you make decisions, financial decisions on green projects as well as all kind of multidisciplinary projects as well. So that's been a significant change.
So the Coombe Valley Countryside Park, the master plan was developed by Groundwork a good 10 years ago now.
What's Groundwork, sorry?
So Groundwork is Environmental Trust. They used to be nationwide. I think Groundwork London is probably the main office now. And they developed the master plan in 3 phases, but it hasn't moved at all. So the phases are in the 3 phases. I think the project later says the first of 2 year, and then up to 7 years, and then 7 years and beyond. A large part of the site is landfill, and so the hope was that when it got to 7 years, that landfill site would be ready to be used in a recreational way. It looks now like that won't happen because of gas, and there's gas escaping, and the land is unstable. But even so, that was the end of the project, but the project hasn't started yet, and that is because there just isn't the funding to get that project going.
When you talk about having green investment, then Alex, where's the funding coming from? What are the sort of revenue streams or reserves or whatever? What have you?
So for us as a council, and I don't know if this is a common thing that others do as well, but we actually we retain the business rates from renewable energy projects across the district. So we retain that income to use on climate change and environmental projects. So a lot of our own estate and operations projects have been financed from that reserve. But also we are looking at how we access a whole range of finance. So again, don't want to go too technical into finance, but obviously there's been quite a lot of change in terms of public works loan board funding and kind of borrowing at the moment. So we are kind of exploring different options. And again, that's why it's really important to have kind of business case and business model information that helps play to different audiences, especially if we're looking to tap into maybe green finance options, social lending, green borrowing, that kind of thing as well. So I think this is, it helps to kind of make the cases for those particular funders as well.
Thanks very much. And Joe, for you in this new position, what do you find are the things that are helping you, that are enablers for you in your role, but also perhaps what are some of those challenges?
I think one of the enablers is just the groundswell of support that we have kind of outside of the organisation and internally. I've been working in local authorities for close on 20 years, and starting as a planner with an environment specialism 20 years ago, we were still talking about the benefits of biomass, and it was still quite niche, whereas now it's very mainstream. So I think that across the piece corporately, there is an understanding that this is important and it's something that needs to be dealt with, considered, incorporated, embedded. Having said that, I still think that the level of understanding and education across organisations is a challenge. And I think risk appetite or lack of is also a significant challenge. So you'll find that the boroughs that were historically doing well in green and environmental areas are doing better now, and there are a lot of other boroughs that need to catch up. I think climate emergency declarations are great, but they're not statutory and regulatory, so you can pluck a number out of the air and say, this is what we're going to do, without really looking at the evidence behind what that means financially in terms of work or resources, etc. I think that finance is a big challenge, especially for local authorities who have got lots and lots of other challenges. How do you balance the need for social workers versus green relief? That's often what it's kind of brought down to in kind of very binary terms. And I think the importance of being able to demonstrate value or to quantify value is really important. There have been tools, across my career that have been used to support this. But I think as much as we potentially don't want to think in terms of numbers, demonstrating financial value is going to be really important moving forward. I think it's not enough to say, you know, it will help reduce childhood obesity and people feel better in age, and we need to be able to pit against, you know, the need for more housing or the need for, you know, better children's social services, etc.
Good. And Julia, do you think that, you know, the tide is behind the kind of things that you're wanting to do as well within the council?
Yes, we've got full support from our members. We've got the climate change steering group who meet every month and kind of come up with proposals for projects that still, like I said earlier, the still funding will support. And I think, we do have a kind of, I don't think it's a given that the kind of green thread that's going through the local plan. We have to do, you know, a fair amount of consultation to make sure the kind of residents and the communities are on board with that. And obviously funding and the strains on funding at the moment are going to contribute to people's concerns about where that money is going. But internally, we've got a green group that started with Rother. We've just joined we've got a meeting with UK 100, which kind of environmental group, so we can network with other local authorities, and that's all supported. That's supported by our members, and we're also a member of the UK Green Building Council. So we try, there's a groundswell. We try, we are kind of getting involved and doing as much as we can to kind of be involved in a larger network to kind of tap into other people's ideas and other people's experience, but also so we can kind of spread that message within the consultations we're doing.
So, from the Local Government Association, what I know is we've got over 95% of local authorities have declared a climate emergency. Less than 15% have declared an ecological or biodiversity emergency, or made mention of the ecological part within that climate emergency. And what we're doing with the Nature Smart Cities is we're looking how, obviously there's the carbon sequestration, resilience, adaptation pieces, but there are these other values that come out of the ecosystems and biodiversity. How do you find that within your councils, pushing that agenda? So you've got the climate change. How are you finding bringing this greener infrastructure piece? Alex, I don't know.
Yeah, sure. So, I think like a lot of organisations, we traditionally kind of focused on that zero carbon strategy first of all, but our doubling nature strategy came afterwards quite quickly. So we do try and look at both aspects, and similar to Julia, we have agreed to our core kind of member group, officer group, and we are trying to make sure that our projects are not just energy focused, not just climate change focused, but also pick up some of the kind of biodiversity, the green infrastructure side as well. So when they can be, we try and do that integrated approach, but also looking at kind of specific biodiversity projects as well. So we're trying to kind of look from both perspectives.
And so you mentioned that this is the Camborne Business Park. So can you tell a little bit about your experience when Phil, you are here. Here is Phil came along, and part of the whole development of the Nature Smart Business Tool is to sort of test it out and try it out. And after the first capacity building workshop, you said, we'd be interested at South Cambs District Council to test this a bit further. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah, sure. So we were quite lucky because the room in which we sat in overlooked the plot of land that I was looking at we used for the project. So it's actually really helpful to kind of have it visually in front of us as well. But we sat there. Phil was really helpful to kind of go through how we input information into the model. And I think my kind of initial thought was how I would use it with decision makers and members and kind of getting sign off on particular projects. But I very quickly picked up that actually it's a tool, like others have mentioned, that you can use from the start. So whether it's the kind of concepts or kind of early stages of planning a project as well, I think is really important.
And so what was your perhaps the sort of biggest learning from it in terms of the challenges?
So biggest learning, I would say, kind of biggest learning for me, I guess, is around, I'm a multidisciplinary, so I've not got a particular specialism in one area, and I actually found it quite useful for that because it went across a whole different range of kind of technical areas. So for me as a kind of self-proclaimed generalist, I actually found it really useful from that perspective, because it did kind of pick up, I could use it very easily to kind of look at a whole range of things. So that would probably be my kind of initial kind of thought on
and what were you trying to do with that plot?
So we would be building, we're planning to, thinking about building out a kind of commercial property in terms of a range of kind of units for the kind of offices. So it would be lab-based, but perhaps some offices as well. So however, it's the current site has been vacant for such a long time. It's actually a really, really green site. And
so you're getting rid of a rewilding site?
Well, yes, and that was the kind of interesting thing for us, is about plotting that baseline, being really honest about what that baseline actually is, and then kind of looking at the project, the built part of it, and then looking at the other kind of environmental aspects that we could put on the green infrastructure aspects. And it's setting within the wider park as well, so some of that cultural ecosystem services stuff was really interesting for us as well, to kind of entice people back to work in a building and collaborate in a building means actually you need to have a really nice atmosphere for them to work in and go to work. So it was really interesting to kind of...
So the business tool helped you look at those cultural ecosystems?
It did, yeah. So traditionally we haven't thought about food growing. I think was one of the things that came up in terms of planting and looking at that as a part of the project. But actually, maybe we could look at that to kind of have an employee benefit. It was really interesting to kind of add different parts into a project that we haven't thought of.
So kind of, going back to Vita's presentation, that tweaking a bit of the inspiration and the looking sort of the integrated part of it, looking across. And Julia, you also had a similar experience. I think Phil came along before the first workshop, wasn't it, as well, I think, to do the demonstration. And after,
Bill came to Rother after the first workshop. We said we'd like to have a look at Coombe Valley Nature Park. We had a lot of fun, kind of putting in the data, and kind of, just interesting to see the different variables. So you're kind of putting things in, taking things out, and the kind of impact that has on the end result. I was speaking to somebody earlier from Wildlife Trust, which was almost like a little bit of information. It's a dangerous thing, because I thought we'd, take, by putting in extra water, I think that kind of eradicated quite a lot of the insect population from fish eating everything, and that was quite interesting to see how things, the impact of different proportions, I guess. But then the only issue that we had is that it's an IT issue, and that, IT is great when it's working, but when it isn't, we haven't been able to enable the macros on the business model. So hopefully today we'll be able to resolve that. So we've had quite a few people looking at it, and IT have kind of given it the thumbs up, but there's still no sign of the Nature Smart tab. So I'm hoping today we might be able to have a look at that, and then we can use it in the future, because we are keen to use it and kind of take those phases of the Coombe Valley Park further. At the moment with Phil, we just looked at phase 1, so we looked at the benefits that we could create from the first phase of the master plan, and now we've got 2 more that potentially we'd like to look at to see how that pans out.
Good, thank you. And I'm now like to, does anybody have any questions for our panellists here? Things that, yes, good. And I'll pass the microphone to you. If you just say your name and your organisation.
Hello everyone, I'm Seb Dunnett. I'm the ecology lead in the climate unit at Hammersmith Development Council. Bit of an old brag, but we're one of those 15% of the councils that have done their ecological mercy as well. I had nothing personally to do with it, so well done them.
But is it good to be part of an organisation?
It is good, yes, yeah. So well done them, I guess. So my question is to, Julia. I think something like 80% of buildings we need by 2050 have already been built, and a problem I have talking to my own planning officers is that there's a focus on green infrastructure for new developments. It's all about how we're going to introduce it in new developments. And what I really want to make more of a thing is ecological retrofitting. I was wondering, you were saying you were redoing your local plan. Has there been any talk of that? Do you know how we can probably push for that in the same way as insulation?
I don't think we're at that point yet. We're at kind of early stage. I wouldn't really be able to comment on that, I'm afraid. Sorry. I mean, good to kind of touch base with you down the line, see how you're doing with it. And if we are, I'll definitely get in touch. But we're looking really at we're just not at that point at the moment.
But I think that's a hugely interesting question. I can see you nodding. Do you want to?
Yeah.
No, but you're saying that equal interest in that. So how do we do the retrofitting? And I suppose in terms of planning, it's future planning, isn't it? But maybe what we need to look at in the councils is if we're looking at housing retrofitting, how do we do the ecological retrofitting at the same time? So getting housing people together with us as well. And have you had those conversations?
Yes, so I mean, I think I've been working in ecology for about 10 years now, and we always tend to get eclipsed by the climate emergency, so it's quite nice to be kind of up on the same platform now. And I think it's a use case for roofs, right? Because everyone's now looking at roofs. I heard food growing, I think it was mentioned. You know, people are already saying let's get gardens on roofs. You know, let's get solar panels on roofs. Let's get everything on roofs. So it's about trying to assess what the right use of the roof space would be. So I've been talking with officers in the council as to what are the parameters within which is the best option for each. So, you know, if there can't be solar panels up there, could we think about green infrastructure? If we can't be green infrastructure, could we think about food growing?
Fascinating. That's really, really good. Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
It's quite similar, but...
No, it's good. Your name and your...
Tim Simpson, West County Council. Alex, I was going to ask you, along similar lines really, how you balance out the delivery of green infrastructure versus sustainable energy? Because certainly we've seen within our organisation lots of shift towards retrofitting sustainable energy, partly I think because of the fact that it has immediate payoffs, whereas GR is much longer term. How do you manage that in terms of your financing and balance between the two?
Yeah, I should say, you know, my original title was Green Energy Investment Manager, and it's kind of broadened from that. And I think that's mainly just to answer the gentleman's question more about us having that dual strategy around the net zero and the doubling nature. I think that has helped to kind of refocus minds. In terms of the business cases and the kind of drive to do greener projects as well as the energy side of things, I think it's still, I'd say it's still early on in those discussions. You know, the focus has been on, okay, we've got a site, straight away we look whether it's suitable for solar, that kind of thing, and that's almost like the kind of has been the default position. I think it's about trying to change that narrative internally. So, for example, I'm working really closely with the planning team and looking at our strategic Cambridge's green infrastructure strategy as well to try and look at how we hook into that. And I think this business model tool is one way of trying to kind of quantify and bring in that financial speak in terms of how you would quantify that into a business case. So I think there's so much information around the financial benefits from energy projects that it's quite easy for me to kind of build the business cases for that. And what I'm trying to do is make it as easy to understand when it's maybe a complex project or it's a combined project, looking at energy and also the green infrastructure as well. But I wouldn't say we're fully there yet, but I think it's just about trying to write it, the kind of business case in a language that is kind of elevating some of the benefits of the kind of green infrastructure side, so that again it's that wide discussion around land use and what, you know, we can't just have it all full of solar panels. It does actually, we need to think about what we need to use that land for. So again, it's a bit of internal education around understanding how we're going to prioritise sites for different uses. So I wouldn't say we're there yet, but it's an ongoing conversation.
So it's very interesting hearing you talk about the green infrastructure strategy, which is part of when we're doing reviewing the local development plans. And so maybe that's an area, you know, where you can look at connectivity with gardens, with these allotments, and the things that not normally the SSSIs or the nature parks, you know, that are designated areas, but actually increasing that to be more of these opportunity areas. I think now we're talking about this connectivity in urban or peri-urban areas.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that the other kind of hook or angle that I'm kind of going for when I'm writing the business plans is around that kind of landscape recovery and kind of almost like a balance from the growth agenda and the kind of growth messages around kind of housing, big developments, and how you actually help parts of landscape recovery. That's the kind of angle that I've been looking at to play in some of the business cases, and then using like the business model tool to almost try and quantify the benefits of that message. So yeah, trying to kind of give them equal status.
Julian, what about this? Sorry, Joe. In terms of the balance, this balance between climate and the green infrastructure side, and obviously they're now inextricably linked. But how are you finding that?
I
think it's an interesting one because I think there was a time when green infrastructure took precedent over sustainable energy, so it's a very kind of cyclical move, and I think to encourage officers who are struggling with finding opportunities to retrofit their green infrastructure, in the same way that on the energy side we really had to make the case. I think that's really kind of where we need to be. Energy is definitely kind of front and centre in everyone's mind because we have these very set targets, but I think there is equally an opportunity for officers to really go back and say, this is the actual benefit, these are the opportunities, and really kind of set it out step by step for decision makers so that you can really be clear about, notwithstanding the need to reduce energy for the climate emergency, etc., there is also an opportunity and a need to do this as well. And so I think there's an important part that Parks team, however they're configured, need to play in this role, because working with Paul, and we're relatively new to Southend, but we've already got a kind of a game plan set out in terms of what the park strategy will say and what other policies that fall out of it will say, which will develop into an adaptation and resilience piece. So I would say don't be discouraged, but kind of think about what is it that your energy partners are doing, and do a similar thing but on the infrastructure side, and I think there's opportunity for both.
Good, thank you very much for bringing along that adaptation resilience piece, which is coming from the green side. And any other questions that you have? I'd like to, we've talked about that green and the biodiversity, and I'd like to see, we heard from Michael Miller this morning about London and the air quality issues and the Clean Air Act, and air quality is also one of the areas that is used in the business model. It can talk to you about quantification of the values for air quality, as well as the climate resilience in terms of flood water management. And is that anything that you're looking at in your councils in terms of how your green infrastructure can help improve air quality?
I think from a Southend perspective, because of the multiple co-benefits of green infrastructure, we tend not to pull out air quality versus flood resilience unless it's specifically for that audience. In general terms, air quality is mitigated to a certain extent, but I think it sometimes frustrates the process if you say we're installing some green infrastructure here to mitigate or offset air quality impacts there. I think for me personally, it's more helpful to talk about it in its widest sense.
Good. Yes. Just say your name.
Hi, I'm Ed. I'm at Imperial doing looking at green infrastructure for a thesis at the moment. And I was just interested in what you said, Joe, about you don't pull out the different types of benefits or mitigations that you're looking at when you're planning green infrastructure. So how do you know the best places to put the infrastructure in that case?
So I think it really depends. So if we talk about air quality specifically, air quality isn't a static thing. So in Southend we've got 2 air quality focus areas. So if I put green infrastructure in an area that isn't in that air quality focus area, it still has air quality benefits. So if I were to make decisions based on this piece of green infrastructure is specifically for air quality as opposed to this one which is specifically for flood resilience, it can minimise the co-benefits that we get. And I think that's generally how I go into it. There will be some occasions where, so flood risk might be a better example, where there is a direct link, but I think if you go into it thinking this is for that element of the co-benefit of green infrastructure, it can be restricted.
Sure, thanks. But I suppose my question is more about how do you actually decide the best places in your whole kind of city or council in other cases to put the green infrastructure? That's what I'm going to get at. It's kind of a selfish question.
No, it's absolutely fine. It's a valid question, and I think the reality is that sometimes the best place isn't the place that you get to put the green infrastructure. So it's about where is the opportunity as opposed to where is the best place, because from an authority perspective, if there is a site that would be amazing for green infrastructure, it's probably also amazing for housing and some other commercial development and some other things that are, you know, been planned or promised, etc. So it would be amazing if we could do things in the best place, but I think the reality is that we put the green infrastructure where the opportunity is, and I think the more dense and the more urban your borough is, the more difficult it is to put things in the best place when, as an authority, you've got lots of other strategic objectives that you have to deal with as well.
Thank you.
That was a very good answer, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for those discussion points, it's been really interesting.
And you are?
Oh, I'm Alex Collins, I'm a lecturer at Imperial College. I've been involved in the Nature Smart project. My question is around green infrastructure and the health and well-being benefits. So we've heard a lot of policy makers, a lot of people speak very publicly about how we can intrinsically know that green space is really good for our health and our mental well-being. And like the talk, at the initial talk, about how it's come to the fore since COVID. But yeah, I feel like it's quite difficult to make the link between the two, and that we're not necessarily seeing the two agendas link up. And so I wondered if you had any stories of how they have been brought together, but if that's not happening, what you think the reasons for those agendas are not coming together at the kind of implementation level.
So I'd like to ask Julie, first of all, if you're doing the local development plan, this is a kind of a key area where you perhaps might be able to bring the two. Do you want to reply?
So what we're doing at the moment is we're working with the Kent Wildlife Trust Consultancy to identify target areas for habitat creation, for BNG and for nature-based solutions. And part of that brief development is one of the criteria will be looking at green infrastructure, green spaces for parts of the community in kind of less, with a kind of lower, the kind of poorer parts of the community in Bexhill and in Rhine and the urban areas that possibly haven't got the access to the green space that the communities in the rural areas do. And so that is one of the criteria we're putting in the brief to make sure those areas are kind of those communities, more deprived areas, for example, have access to growing spaces. So the interventions can be quite small, but we have put that in the criteria.
And is that specifically because of what Alex has just mentioned, which is about this increased awareness of mental health?
I mean, health and well-being is one of the more important, one of the kind of up there topics in our local plan review.
So the planning review is what's bringing in those health and well-being, and perhaps what you're talking about there is some of this retrofitting, because you're actually talking about existing spaces that are recognised as deprived, and even if they're small pockets, you are looking in your local plan about how you may be able to create some areas.
Yeah, that's
so that actually, it's kind of uncovered perhaps a little bit of a better response to that. Alex, do you have an answer?
Yeah, I guess my experience, obviously using the business role, the specific example of the business part was quite interesting because it gave me an opportunity to think, how do I quantify the benefits of a place that is nice to work from a health and well-being perspective, and how that might translate into, it'll be easier for us to rent and let space and be more attractive. We're slightly outside of Cambridge, so we need to kind of think about our competitiveness for building out an office block with a kind of green infrastructure project with it as well. So yeah, I think it's kind of made me think about how you try and make those links more strongly around kind of the health and well-being side, and definitely as employers, I think, again, this is taking a slightly different tangent, but we're always looking at what businesses are wanting from office space, and actually health and well-being is up there again on their agendas for their employee base as well. So how you integrate that into a project and a business case model is really important.
So that's fascinating. So we've had two examples. One is about those that we know from the studies of those in more deprived areas who haven't had any access, especially during COVID, this was discovered. So therefore, now, retrofitting to give them some of that. And then at the other end, the value of this in the market, when you're saying that businesses who are looking at office space are now putting up there those health and well-being, so they're driving some of that value. They're not, so you don't have to necessarily, you're quantifying it for them, so you need to be able to quantify. I'm hearing from you, Alex, but they've already put the aspiration, the value, placing it high in terms of what they're selecting to attract employees to an area that isn't already a key area. So those are really two very different answers to this. Very, very good. Yes. Do you have the?
Can I jump in on that?
Yes.
I think something else that's really important to consider with health and well-being is that you need a diverse offer. Not everybody is stimulated by a perfectly manicured Victorian garden. And I think that when we're talking about green infrastructure, generally there is a perspective that can be quite narrow, and I think there's a real opportunity to really ensure that green infrastructure in its widest sense, whether that's rewilding or wild or meadow or manicured or somewhere that is, not frequented by dog walkers or, not used for barbecues or whatever it is, can be accessed by the majority. I think there's a really important piece in that as well.
Thank you, Jo. That's hugely important about the diversity of the design of those and the characteristics of those. Yes.
Hi, I'm Drew Jent. I lead the architecture team at Southend Borough Council. Very much on focusing in on one building that you all know, which is Launchpad, and just very quickly to say, one of the things we've done there, we've actually adopted the American standard of well buildings.
Well buildings?
Yes, which does very much consider the health and well-being of the people who will be in that building, which I recommend.
Can I just ask, has anybody else in any other council here used well buildings? No, interesting.
Okay, well buildings are also partly aligned with BREEAM, which I guess you are all...
We all know BREEAM.
We are getting an outstanding on the Launchpad for BREEAM, just to get a plug in there for it. But well buildings considers air quality in the building, it considers water quality, it considers the outside space, considers whether you're going food for your cafe or not. You get additional points for that. And it is one worth looking at, and I think it did give us quite a few pointers the way we should be going with the building.
So very interesting, if the authority adopts something like that, and then the business model is, as you were saying, it actually enables you to try it, test it, tweak it, to see if you can get the quantifiable values through that. But one more question down there.
I'm Danielle Carmel from Essex Wildlife Trust. Just a really quick question going back to wellbeing. In sort of green infrastructure projects that you've been part of, obviously we're talking a lot about doing things for a community, for the local residents. Have you had experience of involving them further within that green infrastructure project, obviously off the back of the business model, looking at them taking leadership over the work that's going on, or looking at them being involved in this decision making further than consultation? Has anyone had any sort of experience of that out of interest?
Really nice question. Who would like to answer that one?
I've not done it through the business model, I've done it on other projects there.
Good, yeah?
Yeah, we've not used that for the business model, the example that we use for the business model yet, but I can see it as a useful tool within as employee engagement on the kind of commercial side.
Yeah, and I think with the Coombe Valley Park, we anticipate kind of working with the community interest group company and kind of involving them as the business model develops.
In helping kind of adapt the design of it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And obviously you think that's a very important.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of going about it because it's looking at that sort of bottom-up approach rather than looking intrinsically at what the residents need, actually working with them, what they need in terms of saying, obviously with wellbeing, there's a broad amount of things people need for wellbeing. It's not just that sort of, this is the solution, that's your answer. There's a lot of things out there, so it's just listening to all the examples, whether the residents at the heart of that project and leading that project. Obviously also on the back of that, in terms of if you're involving sort of local community groups, there is also funding in that respect as well. That's a huge sort of potential in terms of if your community is leading it, they can actually get funding that way themselves and it being led by them. So the green infrastructure really is part of the community rather than a sort of ad hoc bolt-on.
Thanks so much. I think you brought in a really good point about the business model, which is, it's forcing you, as well as you'll find out this afternoon, to look at
the importance of some of these values and the prioritisation of them, because in the end you've got competing demands, and so you've got to make some choices as well, and so you're having to look at how to prioritise them. If you've therefore got you've got perhaps some elected members or you've got the community members, it's a way then of sort of balancing those out and prioritising them and seeing what comes through.
What we suggest is that you choose somebody who is the person who inputs the data for your group, and you cluster around one of the computers. So in your group, decide who that might be. It would be whoever's got a computer whose macros at work, so they're enabled, they can have their macros on that. But obviously, you can also have your own computers open, you can be seeing what's happening as well with the tool. But what you're doing really is collaboratively together putting the data into one of the computers. Also in your group, agree who will be the person who will report back to the plenary at the end of this session. So just agree who will be that person who will be taking down things that you're saying and thinking and will report back at the end, and a timekeeper as well. So those are the three things that you need to have in your groups. And you are in the driving seat this time, so you are going to be in charge of putting everything in, and the resource people are there openly to help. They shouldn't be driving this exercise, they're just there asking questions. You've got two different scenarios, and we heard those scenarios here from Julia and from Alex. And they are slightly different scenarios, and Phil, thank you very much for helping develop these, because what you've done is help bring out slightly different insights into the business tool. So the groups that will be looking at one of the scenarios, when you feedback, the others should be listening carefully, because it will be telling you things that you didn't really experience in your group and vice versa. And so what are those differences? We can have a look now. So with the first exercise, which is the Coombe Valley Countryside Park, which are the groups that are doing the Coombe Valley Countryside Park? That group number 1 and number 4. As you'll see on the table, you received by email, but I've also printed out, you have the map there of the area, which is the Coombe Valley Countryside Park. What's in red, obviously that isn't going to be developed, as the areas in green. So this is a largely undeveloped, unimproved area of green space, separating the urban areas of Bexhill and St Leonard's in East Sussex. And as we heard from Julia, it's currently used, kind of underused, but it's used for football, for dog walking, and then fishing in the pond. The bottom area is liable to runoff and flooding. Now, what's the challenge? The council wants this part of the site to be an activity-based park, promoting what we were just hearing about before lunch and on the visit to London Wall Place, healthier lifestyles. So this is where you're going to be looking at the tool as it helps you understand healthier lifestyles and providing a recreational resource for local people, again the cultural ecosystem values, whilst also addressing flooding and encouraging biodiversity. So the exercise focuses on that data for cultural ecosystem values, but it also takes you through ways to keep within budget. So that's also going to be a key focus of you two groups. You're going to be looking at what the costings are of that and tweaking to make sure that you can achieve those aims within budget. So you're going to get that insight into the business tool, and you're going to be able to see a comparison of grey and green infrastructure options. So that's group 1 and 4. That's your scenario. Now we go to the Cambourne Business Park, and you'll see that Julia should be doing Cambourne and Alex should be doing Coombe Valley. I hope that's right, so you're actually doing a scenario which isn't your own. And in Cambourne Business Park, as we heard from Alex during the panel session, so Cambourne Town is a new settlement within which lies the business park, which is already partially occupied. Attractively landscaped with grass, trees and hedges, a large flower meadow and 3 ponds, so it's already got a lot of attractive features and biodiversity. The development of remaining plots will therefore mean a loss to that biodiversity, which is what
what Alex was telling us. So they've actually got a very different challenge. It's not how you enhance biodiversity, it's how do you mitigate the loss of it and therefore do other things to keep your biodiversity values up. So the council wants to develop a plot for T10, mitigating the impact of biodiversity and providing values higher, and I don't think you mentioned it necessarily this morning in the panel, Alex, but her members have said, no, not just 10% biodiversity net gain, we want 20, actually at least 20% biodiversity net gain on a very small plot, which has to be also an office complex. So that's the challenge. So how you can get at least 20% biodiversity net gain. Air quality is important, and it needs to provide that attractive setting. We heard about from Alex about the market wants to have an attractive setting for employees to come into this if they're going to invest and occupy this space. So again, you'll be looking at, in this group, you'll find out how the business tool has a lot of detailed features about smaller elements for increasing your biodiversity within a small area. So what are the biodiversity elements in design in a small area that can really up your biodiversity values? And we'll also be looking at costs and keeping within budget. In the first building workshop, we didn't look at, you didn't have a chance to look at how you do the costings and the comparisons. That's what you will be doing today at those groups. Okay. If you have somebody who's decided who is going to be doing the inputting the data, you have somebody to read the first scenario, the challenge that's there. So explain exactly what you do in terms of the group exercise. Somebody read that to the group. And you've got the timings there as well, so somebody will be a timekeeper. And you're off.
With Borough Council, I'm a planning policy officer. We had exercise 2, so the business part. So working through it, initially we made some minor changes, such as adding tall grass, the hotel, deadwood, that kind of thing. So small, simple changes. And that saw a fairly significant impact on 3 of the ecosystems, so the birds, butterflies, and bees. There was no significant impact to the amphibians, but that was already quite good before we started, so we weren't terribly focused on that side of it. When it came to the budget side of things, we were about £200,000 over budget because of the cost of the green roof. So we halved the green roof, which then allowed us to be able to come within budget. But one thing that we didn't get around to doing was going back into the program to see what impact that would have on the various ecosystems. So that's still stuff that we would have to do.
So this was the Camborne Business Park, where it's already quite attractive and landscaped around, but they're trying to develop this plot, and it's a small plot. So what you were doing was the green roof and these lots of small things, but you said they really did increase.
Yeah, in terms of the ecosystem side of things, it added a lot of value.
On the biodiversity side.
Yeah.
And on the cultural ecosystem, so in terms of the visitor, sort of the employees' enjoyment of that space, does that apply too?
Well, when we had to go through and do that subjective exercise of identifying kind of what the priorities were for there, we didn't feel that the employees' enjoyment would be the key focus. It would be more about the business operation side of things, because they're the ones making the final decision. So our model didn't show a huge impact on that, but maybe if we had scored it differently or saw the value of that differently, what we had actually put in probably would have scored a bit higher.
Okay, really interesting. We can see there the differences. If you sort of think that's not the priority, then not the scoring changes. Good. Thank you very much. And well, how did you find it? How did you find the model? Is it different from what you were expecting?
Well, I attended the first workshop, so I had a vague idea of how to use it. I still feel like I would need to go away and play with it a bit more, and it'd be nice to have something that would be specific to where I work, so then I would gain a better understanding of using that. But that's enough for me to do on my own.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Great. And we'll now have group number 3. Good.
And while you're coming up, we'll call on group number 1 to come and take a chair as well, and this group 2. Look at the face.
We've lost our speaker.
You've lost a speaker. Can somebody speak for them? Will they be back in a minute?
No.
No, he's gone. Will you be able to give some comments on it?
Yeah.
Here we go. Come up and join. Fantastic. And group number 1, please. No, it couldn't be you. It shouldn't be you at all. Yeah, Alex. Is that okay? Okay, good. So introduce yourself and your council, but also introduce which of the case studies that you are about to speak to. Thank you very much.
Chris Bibb, I work for Lewis and Eastbourne Councils in the Parks and Spaces team. We did the Camborne case study, and we worked quite well through the form. We picked up some points around the formatting and some of the descriptions on the form that we wanted to sort of feedback to the developers. But regarding the exercise that we did, we basically went in quite hard and put biodiversity and ecology in the environment at the forefront, so we maxed out on everything, just to see how that would affect the end score.
Bold, radical.
Much to the tutting of our moderator.
She did come up and kept saying, I can't control them.
And maybe to all our surprise, it actually worked out quite well. So we put in, we went for as small amount of weedy grass as absolutely possible and put absolutely everything in. And then we were able to tweak that a little bit by...
Can you give an idea of when you say everything in, because there's some that, so the other groups didn't see the kind of biodiversity elements. Can you just give us a taste of the kind of things that you included?
Oh, we put in hedges, trees, tall grass, different types of water, so standing water, but then nutrient-rich and nutrient-poor standing water, tall reeds and grasses in the water, berry gardens.
No, you weren't at the
Woodland?
berry.
Oh no, we took the berry gardens.
You were not. That was my one win with them.
So you put a new water element in the plot?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think the concept was one of the ponds was nutrient-rich, one wasn't.
Right.
And the form allowed us to do it. Once we sorted out how the form worked, we were able to do that. And we had to increase, yes, actually we only put in nutrient poor first, and that wasn't noted as good for amphibians, so we had to change that to a nutrient rich and a nutrient poor, so the amphibian score went up.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we had to make some changes, so we took out the berry garden and we made our savings just by reducing the amount on the green roof. But apart from that, everything else scored well. We kept the maintenance budget the same as the existing baseline, pretty much within £200, brought it in within budget.
So when you were mentioning kind of that sort of food idea, so you've got lots of biodiversity, not necessarily food growing, but you have lots of biodiversity otherwise.
Yeah, we did have food growing as well.
You did have
a community allotment space.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Is there an office space too? No.
Not necessarily.
Oh, no, I've lost the office.
Yeah, and it was interesting. It was interesting the way that we were able to tweak the prices, tweak the amounts. The gentleman from his name showed us that you could change the parameters, so there's a cost range between the lowest and the highest, and it was using the average, and if you wanted to use the lowest or highest,
so you actually you were getting into turbo power in your business model,
okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so we used the average price, but then we changed it around just to see how that would affect things, affect the maintenance costs.
And have you ever had something like that where you can tweak even kind of the costs in that way?
It's quite useful to use.
Okay,
yeah. Yes, so basically some feedback around the form, just maybe some slight tweaks around how it's designed, might make it easier to compare two things. There was some jargon, maybe a suggestion of a jargon tab, so things like RC, which we didn't understand until it was explained. Maybe that could be just in front of you so that you could look,
Right.
look and see how that works.
Right.
And a note from our ecologist in our group that beehives are not particularly good for ecology. It's bee hotels and reform shares bee hotels.
Beehives are good for honey, but they're not good for biodiversity.
Competes with the other pollinators.
Yeah, you want the other pollinators. Okay.
Great, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Very interesting.
So sit back and thank you. Okay, yeah, so I'm Danielle Carver, Essex Wildlife Trust. Wasn't prepared for this, so I'm just going to ramble on a little bit. But we had Coombe Valley Countryside Park. Much of it was already populated for us, so it was phase 1 of the plan. So it was the sort of basic changes that they're going to put in place initially.
So can I just, so those who didn't have this one, so this is the countryside park that had a master plan written in different phases. So in the baseline scenario, those would be populated as phase 1 as if that had happened?
Yes, so it was things like reducing amenity grasslands but increasing flower fields. We did discuss a little bit about what flower fields meant, because that's a little bit ambiguous, but yeah, tall grass, a few scrapes, because one of the bigger focuses was looking at water retention, because a certain area was prone to flooding, and then it was looking very much the master plan was at looking sort of outdoor activities, trying to get people to have a better, healthier lifestyle, getting out and about, interacting with nature. So we did chat a lot about how that might be brought about, because one of the main things was a footpath and the other was interpretation signs. So we filled it all in, and one of the things that we did come across was that originally in the sort of pre-populated table they had picked impermeable surfaces, so that came out as being quite expensive, and then decided to do it around the fishing pond. So we looked very carefully at the difference between impermeable and permeable, and then obviously looking at water retention within that as well. So it really gave us an insight into costs and differences, and how that linked towards the sort of main master plan. And yeah, I suppose one of the comments we had was that maybe this one was less focused on biodiversity, which is fine. It was more, based on recreation, outdoor activities. So at the end, when we looked at our fact sheet, we'd sort of gone from a baseline of either 0 or 1 to an improvement of 2. So for phase 2 and 3, there was a lot of movement in terms of what else you could do for biodiversity, and we did actually come out under budget after lots of tweaking.
There you go, Julia.
So, I think overall we thought that the tool was good, really, at looking at the differences between different paths and playgrounds and things like that, and the cost, rather than necessarily the creative side, because we didn't do that bit, sadly.
No, but I think it is good, because in the first workshop, people saying, but what about the costings, and how does that happen, and how can you get an insight into that? So good.
Yeah, and we didn't change. So when we did do the costing, the flower field and the tall grass came out as extremely expensive, which we did question, because obviously I don't think there needs to be any cost around that. It's just management plans, obviously it's capital costs. So yeah, we did have a discussion about what that might.
They've both gone, haven't they? Yes, we can make that.
Oh, we did.
You asked that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I raised it with Rico, so we can
check it out.
But
Great.
he assured us that it will have come from the literature, but it probably needs a bit more thinking.
Yeah, and in the business model itself, it can override.
Yeah, we did. We put 0 instead of 85,000.
85,000.
Yeah.
Just for long grass.
Is that why you came up? The clues in the 3 0. Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you so much. Excellent, thank you.
That was really comprehensive. I don't know what to add, but so we had Coombe Valley as well. I think we spent quite a lot of time going through the questions and kind of having that conversation as almost like a project team. So it kind of worked really nicely where we.
You look very studious, because you all had your computers there and you were all doing it together.
We were all together, kind of looking at and answering the questions and just making sure that we were coming back to the original drivers for the project and making sure that we scored them appropriately to start off with. Because I think that's really important, like the scoring at the beginning and making sure that you're setting the weighting properly against the criteria.
And have you done that? Because that's an interesting step, isn't it?
Yes, and then when you then go back and look and actually say, okay, so does the scenario help us to achieve what we said we wanted, and you know what the drivers of the project were originally? I think we came out over budget to start off with, and then it made us go back and have a discussion about the cost of the interpretation signs and the impermeable pathway. I'm looking to my colleagues.
So what did you do? Did you reduce the amount of them?
We reduced both aspects, I think, to a certain extent, to just try and bring that budget back in. And I think something that I'm not sure we did, but it's almost going back and just checking that reducing that didn't have an impact on the actual benefit side of things. And I don't think it would have changed things massively in terms of the scoring between, you know, whether something was supporting people to go and use that recreational area, and I don't think it would change it massively. So actually you'd still be getting the benefits for slightly less money. So, but I think you have to have that conversation to go back round and just make sure that the tweaks that you're making are going to actually bring the benefits down as well as the cost of that.
So my name's Joseph Foster. I work for the government in the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. It was weird doing this because I'm the only one who's not a local authority, which is what this is based on. But you know, it's.
But you are overseeing what local authorities do in enabling kind of local community.
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
And so, which business scenario?
So we had business scenario B, which is Campbell Business Park. It's about mitigating the negative impacts of the office development. And I guess, please correct me if I get things wrong, because I probably will. But we kind of initially, I think our key focus kicked off really when we were looking at kind of the sort of section tab C for biodiversity. You know, what is it that we're trying to? We went straight ahead with the kind of biodiversity impacts and side of things. Doing great things around amphibians, bees, and butterflies.
So you could see the changes that you got from them.
That was really interesting to see. And it's looking back now, what's quite interesting is that the kind of almost our brief so much was not so much we want to create a really biodiverse place, but we want to we sort of went ahead and we wanted to make something fantastic and an ecosystem as possible. But so we might have overstepped the remit a little bit in that direction. But it was really interesting to see that how the kind of even slight changes made a huge difference.
And was there any one of those slight changes that really surprised you about how much it pushed some things?
I'm not sure about surprised, but the big change in having fish just ruins everything. Which blows my mind a bit.
In a pond.
In a pond.
In a pond.
But yeah, having the ability to make those slight changes, and I'm thinking that we will praise it as well and show it. I think it'll be absolutely fantastic. I'd love to get that out there. So we looked through that first, and in terms of kind of the cultural ecosystem services for us, what we kind of almost jumped the other way, so it's less about nature, almost kind of how can we make this a really good sort of place for office workers, but we don't want to kind of trap them outside too much because they need to be in the office doing their jobs, not working on the
Oh, they've got little notes on their desk saying, where are you?
You'd be really pleased. So we won't be handing little shovels to go out to the allotment, but having that prompt to think about, not just kind of the sort of quantities about kind of the aims. I think that was really.
And so when you did that was interesting because you did the importance of prioritisation, and then you looked at those, and they came up with those values, did they, in terms of?
Yes.
Great.
Yes. And I think in terms of being able to sort of rank them in terms of what's most important, least important. I used to, before I worked in central government, I worked in local government, getting things down to a more limited cognitive bandwidth for members, less than.
Yeah.
Quite opposite. So I think that was a really useful public exercise. And don't tell myself. I think the budget. We went over budget, I'm afraid.
You did.
We did. Sorry.
We're part of that. The lower cognitive step, or the higher cognitive step, you failed in your task.
But I think one thing we picked up on was I think we talked about this a lot, probably too much, I'd say, but the monetary benefits and how that is, how you define that, how you kind make up part of the business case. So our maintenance costs were actually lower, probably because you only need to water grass, but you spend lots of money fixing potholes, as my family tells me. Well, and so that kind of approach, if we can if there's a way to perhaps kind of really define the monetary benefits in a way that isn't just you get X amount of money per year back in the pockets of the council, then that was something.
I think somebody else mentioned about sort of the health and wellbeing side of it. So, and I don't know. So we mentioned it in the first workshop. So the ONS has a web page where you can go on and put your postcode in, and if you put your postcode in, it will tell you what the tree canopy is like. But it won't just tell you that, it will tell you what that has done to reduce the NHS burden in terms of health and disease. So it tells you how much the tree canopy is reducing the health burden in terms of cost to the NHS. And if we could have a bit more of that kind of tracking and quantification, direct linking, would be great.
Anything to illustrate it.
Yeah. Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like to invite Anna now. And please,
I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody. Thank you for coming along. When we decided to make this a physical workshop, we were a little bit nervous, just coming out of COVID and some of the restrictions, but we had good attendance, but we were really delighted to have you all here, and thank you very much for the active and engaged role you've taken. It's not always easy when you're given work exercises to do, but everyone jumped into it. It was really nice to see everyone working hard and sharing their ideas. But I want to just finish up really quickly by talking about the business model. We've given you some pre-populated versions. You're probably wondering when you're going to get the actual tool itself. So at the moment, the business model isn't available online. It's not freely accessible online because we were conscious that there might be some further tweaks that we needed to make after this next set of workshops across our 4 project countries. We will be officially launching the business model at our project closing conference on the 29th of September, but we will make it available much earlier, as soon as we can really, from our website. And as soon as we do that, we will notify you all. We have your email addresses, we'll let you know. It's on the website, it's available to use. When we make it available, it's not available just on its own. There is a kind of handbook to support users, which comes in 2 parts. The first part is there's a kind of step-by-step guidance document. It also includes a flow chart so you can see how you're progressing through the different worksheets in the tool, and it kind of prompts you when you need to go back or when you need to do things. It's very, very step-by-step, and hopefully will handhold people through the process with little need for any other assistance, really. And then the second part is the technical manual. If you want to know where the data's come from, if you're interested in the calculations, you can find all of that information there. I'm quite conscious though that means that in the meantime, if you want a copy of the business model, where can you get it? Well, if you do want to use it quite soon, please email you myself and Michelle, and we will be able to send you what we're calling a beta version at the moment. So we can send you a version should you want to over the next few weeks or month, have a play with it. But we will just put that caveat that we might make a few further tweaks in the next month just to iron out anything that we've picked up over the course of these workshops. Does anyone have any questions about the availability of the business model? One thing I would say is that we didn't get your feedback on the business model, particularly anything that you might have noticed or want to see addressed. So if you do have any comments of how it can be improved, please send them to us. We would be really grateful for those, and we'll see what we can do during the lifespan of this project with the budget we've got, but we're also looking for ways to continue the project going forward, so they could always feed into another phase of the project in whatever form it goes forward. So I think that brings me to the end. I just wanted to say, where am I? I can't say, sorry. saying the recording, sorry, the recording. So you notice we've got people recording, and they're going to be producing highlights video. They've done full recordings of all the presentations, the panel discussions, and we will look to make those available as soon as we can. If you want to see any of those again, or share them with colleagues. So stay tuned for those. And that brings me to the end, really, just to say thank you once more, and to shamelessly ask you, if you haven't already, and you liked our business model video, to vote for it in the Interreg 2Cs awards. Just pretend, Joseph needs to pretend that he hasn't seen me plugging it. So thank you very much, everybody, and a safe journey home. Just a few thank yous I forgot. I just want to say a huge thank you to Pippa for facilitating the workshop and helping us put together. Huge thank you to my colleague Rochelle, who's been helping with all the logistics. And also to my colleagues Phil and Matt. Phil produced the scenarios we worked with. He's been working a lot with local authorities on testing the business model. Matt's been helping us with the organisation and some of the testing. And some of our colleagues unfortunately had to leave us. And we've also had Alex help and support. So I'd like to thank her as well. But